It was mid-October and I'd had enough. After 15-hour workdays, endless traffic, and sleepless nights in a shoebox Manhattan apartment, I was ready to disappear. I didn't want people, I didn't want noise, I didn't even want Wi-Fi. What I needed was silence, the kind of silence that doesn't come with sirens and vibrating phones. So I rented a cabin. It was a place I found on a site for off-the-grid getaways, rustic and remote. The photo showed a small, weathered wood cabin nestled in the pines of northern Maine. The listing emphasized solitude, no neighbors for miles, no service, no electricity, unless I used the old gas generator. Perfect. The drive up took just under 9 hours. I left the city behind and watched as the highways narrowed into back roads, the buildings thinning out until there was nothing left but trees and the occasional rusting mailbox. Fall had fully settled in. The maple leaves blazed orange and red like embers above the road. By the time I reached the gravel driveway, it was already past 6 p.m., and the sky was draining of color. The driveway wasn't really a driveway, just two narrow tire paths winding through the underbrush. I drove slow. The forest here was thick, almost unnaturally so. The trees crowded the edges of the road, their gnarled limbs hanging low as if they wanted to scrape the sides of my car. At last, the cabin came into view. It was smaller than I'd expected, one story with a steep roof and a stone chimney. The porch sagged slightly, the wooden planks warped with age, the place looked forgotten. Still, there was a charm to it, like stepping into a picture from a different time. I stepped out of the car and was struck by how quiet it was. No wind, no birds, not even insects. Just silence, heavy and unnatural. I pushed that thought away, grabbed my bags and went inside. The door groaned as it opened. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of pine. A fireplace dominated one wall surrounded by mismatched furniture, an old couch, a coffee table scratched with age, and a wooden rocking chair. The kitchen was small and functional. No modern appliances, just a cast iron stove and a fridge that ran on propane. A narrow staircase led up to a loft, but I didn't bother exploring it just yet. I set my bags by the couch and lit the fireplace, using a few logs stacked neatly nearby. The flames caught quickly, and warmth filled the space, pushing back the growing chill. For a while, everything felt fine. I made a simple dinner, canned soup and crackers, and ate it by the fire. I pulled out a book and read for a while, then sipped a beer and listened to the crackling logs. Outside, the darkness thickened. No city lights here, just pitch black. At some point, I dozed off on the couch. I woke with a start. The fire had burned low. The room was colder now. I looked around, unsure what had woken me. Maybe it was just the unfamiliarity of the place, the stillness. I got up, stretched, and decided to call it a night. Upstairs, the loft had a bed with thick quilts. I burrowed beneath them, closed my eyes, and listened to the wind. Only there was no wind. I realized then that I still hadn't heard a single bird since arriving. Not a squirrel, not a rustle in the trees, just that deep, suffocating quiet. Still I slept. And that was my first mistake. I woke up around 600 a.m. though. I couldn't be sure. No phone, no service. Just an old wind-up clock ticking softly on the wall above the stone fireplace. The morning light filtering through the windows was pale and cold, painting the inside of the cabin in shades of blue and gray. I stretched, wandered down to the kitchen, and made instant coffee with water. I'd boiled on the stove. The silence was still there. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was oppressive. I stepped outside with my coffee, expecting to hear birdsong or the distant crunch of leaves under an animal's feet. But the forest was dead still. The only sound was the light breeze brushing past my ears, and even that felt too quiet, like it was being swallowed by something larger. The clearing around the cabin was surrounded by dense woods, towering pines and maple trees, whose leaves were already scattered across the ground. I noticed something strange as I stepped off the porch, not a single squirrel or bird in the trees. No nests, no movement, just stillness. I wandered a bit, maybe 40 or 50 feet into the woods. The ground was soft underfoot, damp with dew and layers of decaying leaves. Every time I stepped, the crunch sounded too loud, as if I were the only living thing in the entire forest. I crouched next to a tree, brushing my fingers against the moss-covered bark. That's when I noticed something carved into the trunk. Deep gouges, 4 of them evenly spaced and clean. Not random marks, not weather, claw marks. I stood up quickly and backed away. My rational brain kicked in, bear maybe, or someone before me messing around with a knife. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound didn't even make it out of my throat. I went back inside. Later that morning, I tried to read again, but every page felt meaningless. I kept glancing up at the windows. Every so often, I could swear I saw movement, just a flicker of shadow gone before I could focus on it, probably the trees shifting in the wind. Only there wasn't any wind. By noon, I decided to shake it off. I laced up my boots and headed down the trail behind the cabin that led deeper into the forest. I figured some fresh air and movement would do me good. The trail was old, overgrown in parts, but it was still walkable. The trees thickened quickly. It felt like stepping into another world. Light barely made it through the canopy, and the farther I went, the more the world behind me faded. 10 minutes in, I stopped. I hadn't seen a single animal. No deer prints, no chipmunks, not even a spider web across the path. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then I heard it, a whisper soft, barely there. Like someone exhaling through clenched teeth, I froze. It was close, less than 10 feet behind me. I turned quickly. Nothing. Just the trees still silent. I didn't run. I walked fast and focused back the way I came, retracing my steps, refusing to look behind me. My palms were sweating by the time I reached the clearing again. The cabin never looked more like a trap. Back inside, I locked the door for the first time since arriving. I sat on the couch, coffee in hand, staring into the now burning fireplace. The flames danced across the old stones, casting long shadows on the floor and ceiling. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the forest was just quiet, maybe it was seasonal, maybe the animals had moved deeper into the woods. But then I heard it again, a sound upstairs. It was a soft creak, followed by something like a low drag, like someone sliding their foot across the old wooden floor. I sat up straight, the hairs on my arms lifted. I was alone. I grabbed the fireplace, poker cold iron, heavy in my hand, and slowly climbed the steps to the loft. Each step groaned under my weight. The loft was exactly as I left it, bed unmade. A small wooden table near the window. A bookshelf lined with old yellowing paperbacks. Nothing else. I stood there for a while, breathing shallow ears, straining for any hint of sound. Nothing until I turned around. On the floor at the foot of the bed was a small carved wooden figure. It hadn't been there before. It was no more than 6 inches tall, rough-hewn from pine, shaped like a man but with no face, just a blank oval where features should have been. Its arms were too long, its legs too thin. My mouth went dry. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. There was something etched into the base. A single word. Stay. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed downstairs the rest of the night. The fireplace burned low, but I didn't dare let it die. I sat curled on the couch, the iron poker resting across my lap like a sword. My eyes flicked from window to window, watching the shadows twist with every flicker of the firelight. The wooden figure sat on the table beside me. I had thought about throwing it outside, burning it, but something told me not to. Not because I was afraid of what might happen, though. But because deep down I was starting to understand something terrifying. That thing wanted me to react. It was a test, a taunt. And if I acted too fast, too impulsively, it would take that as permission. Round 3, Sir Avendorshanayam must have dozed off. I jolted awake to a loud bang from the porch like someone had slammed their fist against the door. The poker clattered to the floor as I shot up. Silence, I crept to the door. The fire had burned low, only embers. Now I didn't dare turn on any lights. I peered through the peephole. Nothing, but then just as I stepped away, I heard it. A long, slow breath on the other side of the door. Not wind, not creaking. Wood, breathing, low measured, like someone waiting. I backed away slowly, my spine crawling. I didn't open the door. The next morning, I checked outside. There were no footprints. No sign anyone had been there, just a small pile of pine needles placed carefully in the center of the porch. It wasn't random. It was arranged in a tight spiral like a symbol. I didn't touch it. Instead, I packed my things. My week-long escape was going to be 3 days max. Tossed everything into my bag and stuffed it in the car. But when I reached into my pocket for the keys, they were gone. I tore the cabin apart. Floor to ceiling, every drawer, every cushion, every inch of the kitchen gone. I went back outside and checked around the porch. The gravel driveway under the car. Nothing. They'd been in my jacket last night. I always put them in the same place, I was certain. Now they were gone, and I was trapped. That afternoon, I walked to the edge of the clearing. I didn't go far, just enough to see if I could spot the road or hear a car, but there was nothing. The air was too still again, the trees too quiet. I turned around, and that's when I saw it, a second figure, just like the first, standing in the center of the clearing, right in front of the cabin. It hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. I hadn't heard anything. I walked up slowly, heart hammering, and crouched to inspect it. It looked identical. Same faceless shape, same stretched arms. But this one had something else. Its base was scorched like it had been half burned. A message. Don't burn it, don't fight. I stood up and backed away. That night, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I blocked the front door with the couch, then sat near the fireplace with my back to the wall. I kept the poker close, the flashlight in my hand. The fire burned strong. That was my only defense now. I had this sickening sense that the fire meant something, that as long as it burned, the cabin was mine. But when the logs crackled and shifted, I flinched. Not because of the sound, but because of the sound I heard after. From upstairs movement. It wasn't creaking floorboards. It was footsteps, deliberate, slow, heavy. They moved from the bedroom to the top of the stairs, then they stopped. I didn't move. The silence was worse than the sound, then dragging something was being pulled across the loft floor. Heavy, uneven. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to look up at the stairs. The top step was still in view, dim in the flickering firelight. Nothing there, but I could feel it. I could feel it standing just out of sight, watching, waiting. Eventually morning came. The light didn't help. I opened the front door and found 3 figures on the porch. One upright, one lying on its side, one with its head torn off, placed delicately beside it. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Something in me had broken during the night. This wasn't a game anymore. It was a warning. I knew what it meant. Leave now. Or next time, it won't be made of wood. I knew I couldn't stay. It was no longer about wanting to leave. It was about needing to. The longer I stayed in that cabin, the more it felt like the very air around me was pressing in, suffocating me. I couldn't even trust my own senses on anymore. The silence was thick, too thick for comfort. The quiet in the woods was too unnerving. I gathered my belongings as quickly as I could, hardly stopping to think. The woodpile outside had shifted. Things had moved. I hadn't left the front door in hours, but there they were. Figures waiting. The sun was barely visible behind the thick clouds as I threw my bags into the trunk and slammed the car door. My hands were shaking. My keys were still nowhere to be found, but I couldn't waste time searching. I would deal with the details later. I had to get out. I took one last look at the cabin. It wasn't right. It hadn't been right since the first night I'd arrived, but now it felt as though the building itself was holding me hostage. I backed the car out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel as I pointed the car toward the only road out. I didn't look back. The drive through the woods felt endless. My mind kept replaying the strange events of the last few days, the figures, the noises, the terror that clung to the air. Every curve in the road felt like a trick, like the forest was folding back around me, ensuring I couldn't escape. The trees towered on either side, forming dark, looming silhouettes against the fading light. Every now and then I would glimpse something in the periphery of my vision. A shadow darting through the underbrush, a shape moving too quickly to identify. I didn't stop to investigate. I didn't want to know. But the forest was starting to remember me. At least that's what it felt like. As I drove deeper into the woods, the road became narrower. The trees crowded closer. I was no longer following a path that led me out. I was being swallowed by it. I slammed the brakes. My headlights caught something up ahead. A pile of rocks arranged in a perfect circle sat in the middle of the road. Not random, too deliberate. I put the car in reverse and sped back the way I came. The trees seemed to close in behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. The road twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The woods stretched on forever, no signs of any exit. I tried to stay calm, but the sense of unease in the pit of my stomach only grew stronger. I was lost. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing was there. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just my nerves getting the best of me. But when I turned back to the road, I saw it. Another pile of rocks, this time bigger. And this time there were figures, tall, thin shapes standing near the rocks, almost like they were waiting for me. I felt my heart stop. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor and sped forward, desperate to get away. But the trees kept blocking my view. Every time I tried to focus, the shapes seemed to get closer, the air heavier. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone in this forest. The night felt endless. The headlights of my car barely cut through the darkness as I sped through the winding roads, hands trembling on the wheel. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but the fear had me locked in its grip, the shapes in the woods. Those figures, they wouldn't let me go. I could hear the faint sound of whispers on the wind carried by the trees. It wasn't just the forest that remembered me. It was everything. The land itself had started to wake up. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the outline of a sign westward. 5 miles to town. I was almost there. My chest tightened with relief. But as I neared the turn that would take me to the town road, I saw it. Another figure this time, standing in the middle of the road. It wasn't one of the shapes from earlier, but something far more horrifying. A woman tall and gaunt, standing motionless. Her face was covered in shadows, but I could see the outline of her features. Her hands hung at her sides, unnaturally still. I slammed on the brakes again. The car screeched to a halt. The woman didn't move. I backed the car up quickly without thinking. I tried to avoid looking in the mirror, but I couldn't help it. The woman was still there, but now more shapes had appeared around her, standing still, like sentinels blocking my path. The shadows stretched unnaturally long. I couldn't breathe. The forest was closing in on me again. The shapes were getting closer. With one final burst of panic, I threw the car into drive and sped toward the turn. The engine roared in protest, but I didn't stop. The road bent sharply. As I turned the corner, I saw the outline of the town in the distance, but the shapes were still with me. I could feel them at the edge of my vision, following the car, blending into the trees. I made it into the town. Finally, the quiet, ordinary streets felt like a different world entirely. I parked the car in the nearest lot, my hands still trembling. I was safe for now, but the forest would always remember me. The hotel I found in town was run down but functional. I locked myself in the room and didn't dare leave. I didn't care about anything except putting as much distance between myself and the cabin as possible. But even now, with the door locked and the window shut, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. The whispering on the wind hadn't stopped. It had followed me. I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window all night watching the moonlight break through the clouds. The town was silent, too silent, but when the wind picked up, I heard something, the faintest scrape against the window. Then the tapping began. I could feel the weight of something unspoken in the air. The tapping had stopped, but the tension hung like smoke, thick and suffocating. The quiet was unbearable. Every shadow, every flicker of light outside the window seemed to carry some hidden meaning, a warning I couldn't decipher. The hotel room felt like a trap now. The longer I stayed in it, the more I felt the pull of the woods, the forest that had been watching me waiting. I wasn't sure if it was just the isolation that had me paranoid, or if something was truly out there, something that had followed me. I hadn't been able to shake the feeling of eyes on me all night, though I hadn't seen anything in the room to suggest I wasn't alone. I could hear the occasional distant hum of traffic, but it was the constant whispering of the wind against the window that unsettled me the most. It felt like the forest was still trying to reach out, trying to draw me back. I needed to leave, to get far away from everything. I wasn't sure how long I would stay in this town, or if I'd ever truly feel safe. But I couldn't sit here forever wondering. I had to act. The thought of returning to the cabin was unbearable. Yet some part of me felt that if I didn't leave soon, if I didn't put more distance between myself and the place, it might never let me go. So I packed my things. I didn't check out of the hotel. I didn't trust myself to stay for another moment. My car was parked outside, and I could see the dark expanse of the road stretching before me, the distant mountains beckoning. The town felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. The drive away from the town felt like I was leaving the safety of civilization, entering the wilderness once again. I was headed toward nowhere, but anywhere was better than there. I needed to leave. But no matter how fast I drove, no matter how many twists and turns I took, the forest still seemed to be following me, lingering at the edge of my mind. Hours passed. The road ahead was nothing but winding curves and a seemingly endless stretch of trees. I kept checking the rearview mirror. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see the shapes again, but I couldn't help it. I thought I saw something move in the reflection. Just a flash, a blur of dark figures, but each time I turned around, there was nothing. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had to be. The sky was beginning to turn dark as nightfall approached, and a strange fog started rolling in, thicker than before. It clung to the road, making it nearly impossible to see the lines. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tightly. But it didn't matter how slow I went. The fog was everywhere, blanketing the trees, the ground, the entire world. I stopped for a moment, pulled to the side of the road, and stared into the dense mists. The car's headlights barely cut through it, and I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead of me. There was no sound except for the hum of the engine and the soft rustling of the wind. The air felt colder now. I grabbed my jacket and stepped out of the car, pulling it tightly around me. The ground was damp, the wet earth clinging to my boots as I made my way toward the edge of the trees. It felt wrong standing there in the fog. The forest felt alive, watching, waiting. And that's when I saw it, a mark, a symbol carved into the trunk of the tree closest to me. It wasn't something natural like the marks animals would make. This was deliberate, like a message, a warning. The carving was deep, like it had been done with a sharp object, and it was old, worn by time and weather, but still visible enough to make my blood run cold. The mark was a circle with an X through the center. Around it were other smaller symbols, lines, dots, and squiggles that looked as though they were part of something much bigger. I backed away from the tree, my heart pounding in my chest. It was too much. I didn't belong here anymore. The wind picked up again, and the fog seemed to swirl around me, moving as though it had a life of its own. The distant sound of footsteps reached my ears, faint at first but unmistakable. Someone was walking through the woods, and the sound was getting closer. I turned around, but there was nothing behind me except the thick, unnatural fog. My breath quickened, panic setting in. Then I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall, draped in shadows, and it stood completely still, watching me. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and empty. I didn't wait to find out who or what it was. My body took over, and I ran stumbling through the underbrush, my breath ragged as I dashed toward the car. I didn't look back. Jim. See, I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station just outside the town. I pulled into the parking lot, my hands still trembling, and parked next to a streetlight. The fog was starting to dissipate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been following me. I looked around, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The world was quiet now. Too quiet. I grabbed my phone to check for service, but there was nothing. No signal. The eerie feeling that I was completely alone in the world settled over me, but I didn't care. Didn't need to stay any longer. I walked into the gas station to pay for gas. The woman behind the counter barely looked up, her tired eyes fixed on something behind the counter. Long drive, she asked, her voice monotone, as though she'd been waiting for me to ask for a while. Yeah, long day, I muttered, not really wanting to talk. I paid and quickly walked back to the car, but as I stepped outside, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't alone. There, standing at the edge of the lot, was the woman, the same figure I'd seen in the forest, tall, gaunt, standing in the shadows. She didn't move, but I could feel her gaze on me. The fog was lifting, but the dread that had been building for days only intensified. I had no choice. I couldn't stay in this town. I couldn't even stay in this state. I started the engine and drove off, the eerie feeling of being watched pressing down on me. I knew that the road I was on, the one that led away from the cabin, was only one path, one part of a larger, more twisted network of roads that didn't have an end, a map, or a way out. Somehow the path would lead me back, and whatever had been following me would always remember. The night was darker than it should have been. Even the moon seemed to shy away behind heavy clouds, leaving the world in an impenetrable blackness. My headlights cut through the fog, but it was like trying to shine light into an endless abyss. The roads were narrow, winding, and twisted, stretching into a forest that had no end, no beginning. Just a never-ending stretch of trees closing in around me. I couldn't get the image of her out of my mind. The woman standing at the edge of the gas station lot, her hollow eyes staring straight through me, the eerie silence that had followed me all the way back to the car. I should have driven faster, but something was pulling me to slow down. Some part of me wanted to stop to confront whatever it was that was out there, but I couldn't. Fear had wrapped itself around my heart, and no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, it stayed with me. I glanced at my rearview mirror. There was nothing but the darkness behind me. The trees, thick and towering, created a canopy that blocked any view of the sky. The further I drove, the more it felt like the road had no end. It was as if the woods were consuming the world around me, pulling me deeper into their grasp, and then I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the trees, half shrouded in shadow. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form bending in unnatural ways. For a split second, I thought I saw its eyes glowing in the darkness, staring straight at me. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. I was breathing heavily, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The figure had disappeared into the trees, but I knew it hadn't gone far. I didn't want to go any further. I wanted to turn around to go back to the gas station, to anything that felt safe. but I couldn't. Something was driving me forward like a force I couldn't resist. I reached for my phone. No signal, of course. The silence outside felt suffocating, as if the world had forgotten me. I looked out of the window trying to catch a glimpse of something. Anything but the shadows swallowed the landscape. Suddenly the headlights flickered. For a moment the car sputtered as if it was losing power, and then the engine roared back to life. Cursed under my breath. The last thing I needed was the car breaking down here. As I drove, I noticed something strange on the side of the road. A marked scratches deep and jagged running along the bark of the trees, the same markings I'd seen earlier. On that tree by the cabin, I slowed down, my breath catching in my throat. The scratches weren't random. They were deliberate, a path as if someone or something was guiding me forward. My eyes traced the marks and my heart stopped. They led straight ahead into the woods, deeper into the very place I had been trying to escape. I could feel the weight of those eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to step off the road to follow the trail into the dark heart of the forest. But I didn't, I couldn't. The fog was rolling in thicker now, blanketing everything around me in a suffocating silence. The trees seemed to grow taller, their branches stretching out like fingers trying to pull me into the dark. I kept driving, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. The woods had become more than just a backdrop. They had become part of the story. The forest wasn't just a place, it was a force, and it was alive. That's when the tapping started. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, like something scraping against the roof of the car. I thought it was just the wind, or maybe a branch brushing against the window. But then it came again, louder this time, a rhythmic tap, 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 like nails scratching against the metal. I looked around, my pulse quickening. There was nothing. Nothing but the fog in the trees, but the tapping was getting louder, more urgent, like a knock on the door. Only there was no door to answer. I slammed my foot on the gas, the car speeding forward, but the tapping didn't stop. It followed me, getting closer, as if something was riding along the roof of the car just above my head. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a halt, my hands shaking. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was only the sound of my ragged breath, the engine idling in the silence. I wasn't alone. I never had been. I turned off the engine, the car eerily quiet now. The tapping had ceased, but it had left an unsettling presence in its wake. I had to get out. I had to know. I stepped out of the car, my feet sinking into the damp earth. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for late fall. I walked to the front of the car, looking up at the roof. There was nothing there, no signs of anything that could have caused the noise. And yet there was something. Something in the way the world had gone still. The trees had stopped moving. The fog hung thicker, like it was listening, waiting. I stepped back to the car, ready to get back in and leave. But then something caught my eye. A figure standing in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the fog. But as I looked closer, I could make out the details. It was a person, or at least it looked like one. Tall, thin, draped in dark, tattered clothes. The same figure I had seen before, the one at the gas station. But this time it was different. This time it was closer. Much closer. I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as if the earth itself was holding me in place, rooting me to the spot. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the figure moved closer. Its steps slow and deliberate. I could feel its presence. It was like a weight crushing down on me, the world spinning in and out of focus. My vision blurred. I couldn't see, couldn't think. All I knew was that it was here, and I couldn't escape it. The figure stopped, just a few feet away, standing in the fog like it was part of it. It didn't speak, move. It just stood there watching me with hollow, empty eyes. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out, and then it reached out. The night had settled in, and as the fire's glow dimmed, I sat in the chair trying to read, though my mind kept wandering. I couldn't shake the oppressive stillness that had settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. The wind outside had died down, and now all I could hear was the crackling of the fire, the rhythmic thud of my heartbeat, and something else. At first I thought it was just the wind, but as I listened harder, the sound became clearer. It was a faint tapping, like fingers drumming against wood. My body tensed, the hairs on the back of my neck standing at attention. I tried to tell myself it was just a branch tapping against the window, but it wasn't. The sound didn't match the wind or the trees. It was deliberate, steady. Something was on the porch. I slowly put the book down and crept toward the door. My breath shallow in my chest. There was no one on the porch, nothing but the deep enveloping darkness of the trees beyond. But the tapping kept coming closer this time. It wasn't just at the door anymore. It was coming from the windows. The window on the left, the window on the right, like someone or something was moving around the cabin, making sure I heard it, making sure I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed the flashlight, hoping it would offer me some sort of security, but deep down I knew it wouldn't. My heart raced in my chest as I crept toward the window by the door, my eyes searching the dark yard, desperate to make sense of what I was hearing. The trees shifted in the wind, their limbs swaying, casting long, grotesque shadows across the yard. And then, just as I thought, I saw something move in the distance. A low guttural sound broke the silence. A scraping, a dragging. It wasn't an animal, not like anything I had ever heard. It was too methodical, too deliberate. I took a step back, nearly stumbling over my own feet as I retreated from the window. My mind raced. What was it? The floorboards creaked beneath my weight as I backed away. Then there it was again. A sharp, unmistakable noise like the scraping of something against wood. The old cabin, so silent in its isolation, suddenly felt like a prison. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen, unwilling to move. The cabin was small, just one living room, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. I was alone, or at least I thought I was, and then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy. I had heard those sounds before, only now they were unmistakably real. My heart slammed against my ribs. I was alone, wasn't I? My stomach churned and I felt a lump in my throat, tight and suffocating. The footsteps were coming from above. From the second floor I stood frozen, my hands trembling as I held the flashlight. I could hear them slow and methodical, like something was climbing the stairs, its presence deliberate and heavy. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. It was something real. Something that knew I was here. Maybe I should just hide, the thought crossed my mind, but it was too late for that. The steps stopped for a moment, as if listening, waiting for me to make my next move. The silence was deafening. Then the dragging noise returned. It was coming from the farthest corner of the house, near the stairs. My body screamed at me to run. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of there, but I couldn't move. I gripped the flashlight tighter, as if its faint light could protect me from whatever was up there. But as the dragging sound continued, I realized something more terrifying. It wasn't just moving across the floor. It was coming closer. Closer to the stairs, and then the unmistakable sound of footsteps again. But now they weren't slow. They were closer. They were coming down. My pulse quickened, each beat feeling like a drum in my ears. I had no time to think. I couldn't just stand there not knowing what was coming for me. I needed to act. I backed away my hand, still gripping the flashlight as I crept toward the stairs. The light flickered and danced on the walls, casting eerie shadows. What was that shape? No. It was just a trick of the light, but in my gut, I knew that whatever was up there was real. The footsteps were unmistakable now, so close, I could hear them as if they were right behind me. The darkness felt alive. I felt the weight of its presence creeping toward me, filling every inch of the room, suffocating me. Couldn't stand it any longer. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I turned and sprinted for the door. I had to get out. I had to leave. I couldn't breathe, my chest tightening as I fumbled with the doorknob. And then just as I was about to escape, a hand gripped my shoulder. It wasn't until early morning that the first passing trucker saw Jack stumbling down the deserted roadside. His clothes were torn, his face pale and smeared with dirt. His eyes were wide, unblinking, as though they had seen things no one should ever witness. The trucker, concerned and unsure whether Jack was in some sort of shock or danger, pulled over and offered him a ride. Jack didn't speak much. His responses were disjointed and incoherent, filled with fragmented recollections of the cabin, the noises, the footsteps, the dragging, his mind struggling to piece together the nightmare that had nearly taken him. The trucker thought nothing of it. He assumed Jack had gotten lost in the woods and had wandered too far, becoming delirious after a long night of isolation. By the time they reached the nearest town, the authorities had already been alerted. A local officer trained in the ways of responding to bizarre and unsettling cases noticed something was off about Jack's demeanor. His bloodshot eyes seemed too wide, his pupils unnaturally dilated, and his entire body trembled as though he were still running from something. Something that wasn't just in his mind. Jack was taken to the hospital, but his condition didn't improve. He was placed under observation. but nothing could ease the terror that clung to him. He muttered over and over about the cabin, about the footsteps, about the thing that followed him through the woods. But the authorities couldn't make heads or tails of it. No one could. A team was sent to investigate the cabin, the place Jack had rented for his getaway. They arrived with heavy equipment, ready to sift through the wreckage of a potential fire. The road to the cabin was narrow, surrounded by thick, dense trees, just as Jack had described. They followed the directions he had given them, navigating through the rugged terrain, arriving with the first light of morning. But when they got to the location where the cabin was supposed to be, there was nothing. Not even a smoldering pile of ash remained. The forest was quiet, unnervingly still. No remnants of a fire, no debris, no signs of a cabin ever having existed. Just trees, thick, unbroken woods that seemed to go on forever. They searched the area for hours, combing the forest floor for any trace, any evidence that something had once stood there. But there was nothing. No sign of fire, no charred wood, no faint outline where the cabin's foundation might have been. It was as if the entire structure had vanished overnight. Jack's story seemed more and more impossible with every passing moment. The officers were left with more questions than answers. Had the cabin been an illusion? Had Jack imagined it all in some sort of waking dream? But how could a man create such vivid memories of a place that didn't exist? In the weeks that followed, the authorities found no further evidence of the cabin, no rental records, no prior reports of its existence. It was as though it had never been. The only evidence of Jack's ordeal remained in the strange and terrified look in his eyes as he was released from the hospital, his sanity seemingly hanging by a thread. Theories ranged from the supernatural to the psychological. Some believed it was simply a case of isolation-induced delusion, while others whispered of something more sinister, something that couldn't be explained by logic alone. But Jack, despite being questioned countless times, never spoke of it again. The case eventually grew cold, the investigators moving on the memories of the strange events fading into folklore. But Jack, though physically fine, was never the same. The woods of that small town and the nightmarish silence that had haunted him there stayed with him. Every creak, every rustle of the wind would make his heart race, and his mind would race back to that place, the cabin that never was. And so as the days and years passed, the story of the cabin in the woods was slowly forgotten, or so it seemed. But for those who had heard the whispers, the chilling stories, the strange disappearance of a place that never existed, the legend was far from over. It lived on in the quiet, dark corners of the world, where some things are better left unexplored.